It's okay to think it, that this looks hard. And it's not at all easy to imagine yourself living in long-term care.
You hear all the worst things.
Louis Capozzi couldn't.
Were you scared to come in?
Oh, yes. Yes, because I heard so many awful things about, people getting not well taken care of, laying in bed.
But something changed. Not just that Louis met a friend in James Armstrong, but he realized he was in a city-run place, Lakeshore Lodge in Etobicoke. It's one trying something new, upending how long-term care homes work, and for him, it is working.
Are you happy?
Well, I gotta tell you honestly, 2 weeks ago I told my wife, Bonnie, I'm really happy. I feel very happy. I'm dying. I have ALS. But, I'm trying to enjoy my life the best I can.
Happy must be a huge word in your last days.
Frank, it's Louis.
Oh, hi, Louis.
How are you doing, buddy?
At a moment when life steals so many of your freedoms, this home is trying to give some back. Louis, once a builder, is now consulted on big things like renos and on the daily details.
Jim and I were fortunate enough, we were on the committee with other residents here to select the menu for next year. They don't do that everywhere else.
No.
And we nixed a few things. And
What did you get rid of?
Salisbury steak.
Salisbury steak.
Yeah.
Nobody likes that.
No.
All of it starts with the resident.
Administrator Rani Calais says unusually here, staff are assigned the same residents every day. Typically, it just depends who's on shift, but here the bonds are strong.
And I suppose that means that when you know that the person in room 234 doesn't like to get up in the morning, then you don't have a PSW going in 3 or 4 times that morning to say, Joyce, it's time, come on, it's time to get up, get up.
No, there's no pressure on the staff. There's no longer the measurement of their performance based on their ability to deliver on a certain time.
If there's a late riser, no need to argue. And to ensure peace and comfort at mealtime, Lakeshore Lodge invested in something that seems basic, but isn't. A hot cold cart.
Oh, this side is freezing.
Yes.
And this side is super hot.
So we're able to provide residents food at the absolute right temperature.
So if they're having a little bit of a rough go getting up in the morning,
Yes.
they're not going to be faced with a cold breakfast.
Absolutely right. And that means a lot to people.
I'll be back, okay?
There is pride here, a quick tour to see the differences in a renovated and non-renovated floor,
And we have done the painting.
which to an outsider doesn't necessarily look like much.
Forgive me for saying this. It still kind of looks like institutional. There's nothing you can do about that, right?
Not about the physical structure, but we can do our best to make it a home-like environment.
As best as possible, residents making calls about their own lives, right down to choosing green paint in the hallway, the type of furniture. But the biggest investment in this strategy called CareTO is more staff for more care.
We keep hearing about the ratios being so high, 1 PSW to like 10, 11 residents. What's the ratio here?
We did get some increase in staffing, and our ratio on day shift is 1 to 8, and it's 1 to 9 on the afternoon shift. So it has...
Is that good?
It is good, and I think if we're honest, we'd all like to see it better than that. And what I heard from the residents, they really loved our staff, but always felt they were rushed. And sometimes there was a hesitancy if they should ask for one more thing.
That reality was breaking staff like Suzette Bartley,
Hi, are you okay?
a PSW at Lakeshore for 18 years, struggling before the changes.
I'll be back.
Where would you have been mentally in terms of how long you could stay doing this?
If they did not put this in place, I don't know, they will be getting a lot of sick calls from me because I personally was getting burnt out. You have a heavy workload. That time we have 10 residents each. And how are you going to fulfill all 10 resident needs in 7.5 hours?
But you have 8 residents now, right?
Yes.
That's just a difference of 2.
Yes, a big difference.
Consider that if someone now calls in sick, it's not the catastrophe it was before because there's a buffer. More staff, more training on conflict resolution.
We talk first before we run to management because there must be some things that we can fix. We are adults.
Constant reminders from the likes of Suzette that they all work for the residents in their home.
If we're miserable, our resident is going to be miserable. So most of the time, if not every time, what we give is what we get.
Suzette says what she sees happening now is how she would like to be cared for.
Did you call Sue?
No.
You know you can call her too, right?
Yeah, I'll try calling her a bit later.
Okay. We have the resource, we have the staff, and we have the flexibility. So we can sit. We don't have to go in right away and like, Mary Jane, your shower right now, let's go. Then we can sit down like, Mary, good morning, how was your night? We have a resident here who refuses blood work for weeks. The last time I said, if you do this, I will hug you. I'll give you a good hug. And he looked up and he said, do you know how long I wanted to hear that from you?
That's about time. How else do you know if it's working? Well, sometimes success looks like nothing at all. Looks like an entirely empty nurses' station.
I thought everybody would be gathering around a nurse's station.
No, we're supposed to be with the residents. Even when we're doing our documentation, we don't sit here to do it. We sit with them, we can talk with them, you know, you can multitask.
Hello, dear.
Trust is the most important part of care, especially for family members.
It's me. It's Clive. You got a big hug?
They know who she is as a person, not just, this resident that can't speak.
You must have been terrified during COVID.
Yeah, for several months we weren't allowed to visit, as you remember, right? And that was hard, very, very hard.
How do you think she fared in that time?
I have no idea.
No idea because his wife, Christine Joannidi, was diagnosed with dementia at just 63 years old. She stopped being able to talk before she moved to Lakeshore. Her move was both hard and good for Clive Smith.
It was so wonderful taking her here and realizing, going home that, I didn't have that 24/7 anymore. But the moment I got home, there was horrible feeling of guilt. Like, oh, you've given up. These conflicting emotions, and we're not geared up to handle those.
Doing okay?
In many ways, the caregivers here are his too. He's here every day.
Do you feel cared for here?
Yes, the staff know me. We have banter together and we joke around about their own lives too, right? There's a lot of laughter.
A toast to long life, celebration.
Families are included wherever possible. Recognize James Armstrong from the dining room? He was with his friend Louis. His wife of 67 years comes as often as she can. They so miss each other. But the staff keep an eye out for his mental health as well as his physical needs, and it shows.
They're lovely, lovely women. We have lots of laughs too.
Yeah.
They become friends.
And what kind of difference does that make for you?
Makes a happier Jim.
And there's that word again, happy. Here's another one, love.
Sounds like she keeps you out of trouble, this one.
You better believe it.
Yeah.
The love of my life.
Paul Murphy, enduring the effects of several brain surgeries, now has his best friend, his wife, as his roommate. The residents found a way to make that happen, even though Amelia's needs aren't quite as acute. Their golden years are getting a little better.
It's good for him because he needs me.
And is it just because you're here, or do you think the changes they've made in the last few months also make it better here?
Oh, the changes they've made help, yeah.
This is a good woman. You feel glad that she's here with you?
I certainly am.
No one knows what life will hand you, and the pandemic showed everyone how cruel it can be when care breaks down. So this, maybe, is time to learn the lessons about how to build it back up.
And this CARE TO program is being rolled out across 10 homes. The city pays some of the cost. The province pays most of the $16 million cost. And as pleased as many people are with the program, there's a lot of frustration that Ontario isn't working harder or faster at bettering care elsewhere, especially after all the pandemic has exposed. So I went to ask the Minister of Long-Term Care what's happening.
I know you've been to Lakeshore Lodge. No. We've spent a fair amount of time there as well. How would you describe how different it is from other places you've seen?
You can see the difference in the people. It's a funner place to be. There's a buzz, but it's also what we're trying to get at in Ontario, and I think other jurisdictions as well, is refocusing on long-term care to be a home.
They've dramatically increased the staffing that they have there, which allows them to have more hours per day per resident, which is interesting, right? Your own government's long-term care commission recommended a standard 4 hours of care per resident per day. That was 18 months ago. The recommendation was that it happen urgently. But your government's timeline is still 2024, 2025. How is that urgent?
Well, when we came in, it was at about 2.5 hours per resident per day. Obviously, that wasn't where we wanted to be. So we've come into the standard where it's 4 hours of care a day per resident by, as you said, by 24, 25. Now, it's time to be in line with our ability to bring new staff. As we bring in more, you can see the difference. As we've now increased it to about 3.5 hours of care per person per day, and you start to see the difference that additional care has on the outcomes for the residents of these homes.
But it still doesn't answer the question about why you can't go faster. I mean, 2024, 2025 was the plan for 4 hours of care per day per resident before the long-term Care Commission looked at it and said, that's not fast enough. It needs to be urgent. But you haven't budged the timeline.
Again, Adrienne, it is working with our partners to when can we bring on the appropriate staffing. Look, we're hiring 27,000 healthcare workers in long-term care alone. 27,000, and that is a mix of nurses, PSWs, allied health professionals.
Are you happy with the pace of it?
I am. Look, I am. You'd always like to go faster, right?
Absolutely.
I think you would, right? I don't think that's, anybody would disagree with that. But you have to do it in the context of what you're able to do. I wouldn't want to go out there and say, I'm going to have 4 hours of care tomorrow and not have the people to fulfill that mandate.
All right, Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.